Wendy Ross is an STC Senior Member and former President of the STC Rochester Chapter. This is Wendy's first appearance in STC India. Thank you so much, Wendy, for accepting our invitation. And we are so privileged that we are introducing such an important topic today, like diversity, equity, and inclusion at STC India for the first time through none other than Wendy Ross, the chair of STC's new Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Advisory Panel. She is a candidate for Doctorate of Education in Executive Leadership. Wendy is passionate about DEI and social justice and brings that passion to her technical communication and project management leadership. Quickly about the session abstract, what Wendy is going to talk to us about. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. Not many of us think that these elements are something that will figure in creating a great user experience, which is actually the theme of the conference this year. But the world is changing, and these elements are increasingly affecting communicators around the world. So in this session, Wendy will discuss some of the ways we can be more inclusive in creating user assistance and impacting user design and user experience as well. Let's hear further from Wendy on this topic and how STC hopes to play increasing community and equity within STC through providing advice, checklists, and other solutions to our members. So Wendy, over to you. Please go ahead.
Great. Thank you. Let me share my screen and make sure I have everything working properly. On the technology side, you can see my screen here? Great.
Yes.
All right, thank you for that introduction and for the invitation to speak. As you mentioned, this is a topic I'm really excited about. And my doctorate that's in executive leadership, my dissertation will be on this topic. So it is something I'm pretty passionate about. Here's my LinkedIn. A lot of you on the conference have already found me there, and I'm making new connections, which is fantastic. And I want to tell you that I'm coming from Rochester, New York, as Rajiv mentioned. And I'm sure probably most folks are generally aware of the geography of the United States and where Rochester or where New York is, the state. I'm actually about 330 miles or 531 kilometers from New York City, and only 90 miles or 145 kilometers away from Niagara Falls, Canada. So it's much easier for me to get to Canada than to New York City, minus the passport. All right. So a quick mention of what our agenda is going to be so you understand where I'm going with this presentation is I'm going to talk a little bit about what is DEI, or diversity, equity, and inclusion, and why it's important. We're going to talk about how understanding DEI can help you serve your audience. We're going to talk about some examples that specifically talk about why this is important to user experience. We'll talk about resources that you can use for more learning. And again, we'll wrap up by talking about STC and DEI, and then if we have time for any questions. All right, so diversity is the presence of differences within a given setting. So the fact is that people are different, and specifically in our workplaces, within STC, within our communities. And this includes all the ways that people are different. So we could talk about age, national origin, language, disabilities, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, education, marital status, and even physical appearance. And as you know, diversity is here. It might be to varying levels within your organizations, but in India, in the United States, and many countries around the world, there are diverse people, even if you're not including differences in race. So what do we do about that? How do we maximize the benefits of having diversity? First of all, talk about having equity. And equity means to ensure everyone has access to the same treatment, to the same opportunities, and to the same advancement. So this could be education systems. This could include access into a building. Within your organization, are men and women promoted at the same rate? These sort of things. Do they all have access to promotions and to education? And then finally, there's the term inclusion. And it's about how people with different identities feel as part of the larger group. So if you want to be inclusive, or your organization does, we talk about actively seeking to make people feel welcomed and respected and supported so that they can fully participate in the work that they're doing. So as you can imagine, this is something that we're thinking about this entire presentation is, why is DEI important to your organization, including your employers? And the extent to which this is important might differ based on where your employer is located in the world or where your customers are. Certainly, especially as I'm sure you've heard with the racial tensions that are happening in the United States in 2020, a lot of organizations are paying even more attention to this. Large American companies have gone out and made large announcements about racial equity, for example. So this is a hot topic this year in particular in the United States. So one of the things that's important, why this is important to your organization, is for recruitment. If your company is a diverse and equitable and inclusive employer, people who will want to work there. And that's important because you can get the best talents if everybody feels like they're interested in working for your organization. But also, and this is more specific to this presentation, is its customers. Delivering products and services that diverse customers want to use and are capable of using. So we do tend to see that products that in their user interface, for example, is more equitable and more diverse, you're going to reach a larger customer base. And then finally, it's important to many organizations because of the sense of community. It feels like DEI is the right thing to do, and also helps serve the communities that they work in, that they sell to, and that they recruit from. I just want to go back and mention, there is the possibility, though, that if you have a lot of diversity in your employment or in the teams that you work on, that there can be difficulties. You have a great opportunity when you have diverse thought within a team to come up with some fantastic creative ideas. Obviously, people will bring in their own perspective, and that can help come up with like fantastic ideas. However, as you can imagine, or maybe you've actually experienced in your work, is that sometimes that can create a lot of difficulty because there are misunderstandings when people don't understand the culture, for example, from which someone else comes. And I know probably most of you have done some sort of studying of the cultures that you work with and interact with. I worked for a large company that had an entire statement, it was a PDF, a couple pages long, that would help us understand different countries that we were working with, the cultures there. So there's that sort of work that can help you if you do work in diverse groups and the teams are struggling. And also I read this great book called Driven by Difference. It's by an author named David Livermore, who is a culturally sensitive DEI author and researcher. And that's a great book to help you understand how to maximize the benefits of diversity on your team if you need that. Again, it's called Driven by Difference. So why is DEI important to tech communications and to usability? Well, as we all know, and has been quite a bit of discussion in this topic in this conference, is that words and images matter. And you can do tremendous amount of damage to your the way people interpret the content that you are writing, to the organization for which you're writing the content, and also do damage to the way people feel about themselves if you use words and images incorrectly. And we want to be conscious of that. Software developers, if you work in that field, you want to be able to have some input on this, because machine learning and other ways that developers create content and applications has an effect on people. We'll talk a little bit about that more in a few minutes. Specific to usability, based on my research, this is more about preference than ability to complete a task, with the exception of people with disabilities. So for example, when it comes to creating a task, or I'm sorry, stepping through a task on a user interface, the difference between someone of different genders, they can still complete the task without having difficulty or any speed change. Same with people of different religions, have the same ability to complete the task. So it's really just when considering disabilities, which again, we'll talk about more in a few minutes. And then there's people that really have a deep interest in this topic, and they actually write either as part of their jobs or personal blogs. They write about social good and create content for that. So for example, there is a, in Australia, there's an organization called the Dementia Australia Advisory Committee. And they've created a significant amount of content about using Zoom if you are somebody who has dementia or just is very old and slowing down a little bit. And that content allows those end users to be able to communicate with their grandchildren and family during the pandemic time. And it also gives suggestions to, the grandkids on how to interact with older people or people with dementia on Zoom, so that they can have better conversations. So that's just an interesting way that you can look at using your skills for social good. So, of course, we talk about this a lot. We need to know our audiences, right, in order to create good content. So I pulled this quote out, and I really liked it. When you research your target audience, it will help you avoid stereotypes. And they give suggestions here on how you can use Nielsen or Pew Research or other multicultural media outlets to really understand who your audience is. I have a friend who also used Instagram and began following people on Instagram that were from different cultures, just to sort of understand where they were coming from and being able to write better content for them. The problem that we have, though, is we all have implicit, also known as unconscious bias. And as a result of that bias, even when we try to understand our audiences, we sometimes make decisions or have attitudes towards them that limits our ability to understand and create good content for our various audiences. So implicit bias really is attitudes and stereotypes that affect our understanding, our actions and our decisions in an unconscious manner. These biases can be positive or negative, and they're involuntary. Let me give you an example of a positive bias. One that we have in the United States is that if somebody is from China, that they must be really good at math. So automatically pigeonholing an employee or a student from China into a math field would be something that is, even though it's a positive bias, it could have a negative result on how we act on that. I attended a really interesting webinar from a brain researcher, a scientist, who talked about why it is that we have these implicit biases. And I can give you an example. This comes from thousands of years of development. There we go. What happened, thousands of years ago with our brain is we needed to reserve some of our brain power for other activities and simpler or more complex tasks. So what our brain did was start to categorize things and make conclusions based on what we saw. So for an example, in most cases, a smaller animal in the wild is less of a danger than a larger animal. So if a person saw a small animal, they might think, or their brain might automatically process it that, oh, this smaller animal might be a rabbit, and a rabbit is not a danger, so you don't need to run. Now, it could have also been a snake that was dangerous, but at the same time, our brain would categorize these things to think, I'll just, move on. I don't have to worry about this. Whereas a large animal might have been a lion. It also might have been something like a cow that wasn't dangerous, but the larger animal would automatically process this as something to be afraid of, and we would prepare to flee or to fight. So our brain does the same thing now with people and things and in our purview. And a lot of what we come up with for the ways that we categorize people has to do with the culture that we're raised in, perhaps the teachings of our religion that we were raised with, the school that we went to, even sometimes our government will impact how we implicitly categorize people. And that's, that's okay. And there's not a tremendous amount that you can do to actively change your implicit biases, or certainly not to change other people's biases, especially if they have no interest in changing. But what really, this presentation and a lot of the DEI activities have to do with is making the next step, which is the conscious decision to treat other people without including those stereotypes, or in our case, to understand our audiences as opposed to just with our stereotypes and writing content for them. So I just want to, I'm checking my time. We have plenty of time, great. I just want to take a quick couple of minutes, and I'm going to ask us to do an exercise. I'm just also checking my chat windows and all the windows. Somebody had a question about conscious bias before I talked about unconscious bias. I will come back to that question. Sorry, I forgot to have the chat window open here. All right, so our quick exercise is we are going to draw or imagine a table that has 7 columns. It'll have a header row and 5 additional rows. In this top column, we're going, header row, we're going to put the word initials. I'm gonna take a sip of my water and let you guys scribble that out quick.
Wendy, if at any time you need somebody to speak, just let me know and I'll allow them. If you want them to raise their hand and you want them to talk, I can definitely allow that to happen if you need to.
Okay, great. All right. Oh, now that you have that drawn out, what I'd like you to do is in each of, in the initials column, in each of the rows, I would like you to write down the initials of someone who is not in your family, whom you trust. So 5 people that you are not related to, but you trust. And I'll let you determine for yourself what trust means to you, whether it's trust to loan them money, would you trust them to make medical decisions? Will you trust them with your deepest, darkest secrets? That's up to you. All right, so now what I'd like you to do is in the header row, I would like you to update, add in the header titles, which are going to be age, education, race, religion, disability, and gender. And once you've done that, what I'd like you to do is put an X or check mark in each of the boxes where the person matches you. In some cases, you might not know their religion or their exact age, and similar age can also be up to you to decide what that is. But you can see with mine, my first person is LG, and this person is a female, as am I, and she's got the similar age, education, race, and disability or lack of disability that I have. So I don't know if folks, once they've taken a look at this, want to specifically speak or just type something in the chat to tell me how similar or different the folks are that they trust. Again, in my case, almost all the people matched. I had one case where the person is not the same age, education, race, or gender that I am. Paresh says, very similar, got the point. Another very similar from Maria. Now there are all sorts of cultural, almost the same, quite similar. Education is a factor that's varying. That's not surprising. Now, some of this probably has to do with the people that you come in contact with in order to become friends with and trust them in the first place. Almost all of the people that are on my list are people that I have worked with. And so, especially if they're in a similar department as I am, they usually have around the same level of education, for example. And oftentimes are the same age. Also, when we think about who we trust, again, it's really easy to trust people that are similar to ourselves. So this often happens as well. Does that mean that we automatically find people who are not like us untrustworthy? That might not necessarily be the case, but this comes back to the question of the conscious bias. There are obviously people who are very consciously and probably happily biased against others. Some of this has to do with our religion, and I'm not here today to try to talk anybody out of being out of their conscious biases or their racism, for example. That is something that I'm actually doing some research as part of my dissertation, is to try to understand if there's if there should be an effort or how successful the effort would be to change people's minds. I think when people want to learn and want to be more open to someone who has a disability or want to better understand other religions, et cetera, that they certainly can. And those people are easy to reach and help educate and share ideas with. But aside from that, it's really difficult to change people's opinions. And I'm trying to, through my research, understand that a little bit more. All right, so just changing around the way my windows are appearing again here. The pain and joy of having multiple monitors. So ability, I want to talk about ability versus disability. This is a really important topic, especially in the United States. When it comes to writing, there's 508 compliance for accessibility. This compliance in the United States is for websites, and any website that is from the federal government or for a company that works with the federal government of the United States has to meet this compliance. I've listed an article here that you can look at that lists some free tools for having your website checked out. That's a good idea, even if you're not dealing with US 508 compliance, because it's in general helpful to notify you of things within a website, if that's where your content is, that is not easily accessible. Some of those things would be, for example, if you have an image on your website that doesn't have alternative text. The alternative text allows different readers, for people who are blind or low vision, to verbalize what is on the image. And you actually have to go into the image and type in what you'd want your alternate text to be. So for example, if you see my image here that says disability equals mismatched human interactions, if this were on the website, you would be able to see that I had alternate text here, and a reader would be able to read that out to the person who is looking at the presentation. I want to talk a little bit about the 80-20 rule. And I know this is used in so many different ways, but the 80-20 rule is that when we initially designed something, it's usually to meet 80% of the users and be able to function with that thing. that we've created. So for example, a swing that's at a playground is meant to, requires that the person using it has 2 hands and has legs to pump and has balance to sit in the swing. And that matches 80% of children. So when we think about our products, we want to think about, are we creating this for 80% of users? Well, for different people, they've looked at this and they've talked about universal design. And universal design of a product or content is where you take the 80% item and then you add functionality to that one product so that you can gather more of those 20% of users. So that would be something like adding accessibility options to your website. Would be the same, all the users use the same website, they just use a different feature of the website. And then when you think about design, there's also inclusive design. And you can take a look at Microsoft's website. They have an entire inclusive design website. And this again is specifically inclusive, is talking about ability or disabilities. And what they have done is identify that sometimes you need a product that's entirely different than what it is that you've created for your 80% of your users. For example, they have created what they call is an adaptive controller for their Xbox gaming system. And gaming has become very popular, as you know, and especially now that it's online and people can communicate throughout the world using their gaming systems, it's really even more important that it be more accessible. So they had a lot of users that could not use or did not have 2 hands, which is what the product required. So they designed an adaptive controller that allows people to use all the same functions, but is in a one-handed product. And sometimes when you create a product like that, they find different uses for it. For example, a young parent can game while the baby sleeps on the other hand. All right, so now I want to talk about some examples of gender bias in the instructions that we create. If you read this article, Isolation and Onboarding, Gender Bias in Aviation Training Documents, you'll be able to read a number of stories where they reviewed all of the documentation for aviation, including mechanics and pilots. And one of the examples was of a pilot instruction. It was giving a scenario about how to plan time and make sure that, you know, what shifts you could take in order to get back home to your wife and family for an event. So it was assuming that the pilot was male and the, you know, had a female spouse at home. So those are sort of things that you wanna watch for and not do in your instructions. We talked about a little bit about earlier algorithms, and in the article, Technology is Biased as Its Makers, the author talks about how racial bias in algorithms is enhancing racial bias. And what they found was that there are some Google ads that talk about how basically what it does is it puts a name up and asks, is this person a criminal? And then you can click on the link and you can like type in your own name and see if the internet's trying to say that you have a criminal record. And what they found is that the wording of those advertisements were always different based on how the name sounded. So if it sounded like an African-American name, it would present it as, oh yeah, this person is a criminal. And if it was a white American sounding name, it would present it differently. So these are some things that you want to consider if you're doing the type of design that impacts algorithms and how websites work. So some examples of bias-free terminology and usage, and I'll give you some resources in a few minutes on these because there are so many things that we can talk about. Try in your documentation or your user assistance to use terms like person or individual and not the he or she, or the very clumsy he/she. Certainly you can write, if you're talking to your end users, you can use you instead of also using different pronouns. They recommend using man or woman instead of male or female. Obviously, if you're doing very scientific documentation or content, male or female might be appropriate. We want to use the term older persons rather than seniors if you have the opportunity to write these type of terms. A person with disabilities is a way to person focus your words. With somebody that has disabilities, we don't use disabled person. We might talk about a wheelchair user or a person who uses a wheelchair, not a person who's wheelchair bound. And also we're making some strides in recommending using primary, secondary instead of master slave, for example, in our terms. If you have opportunity to use some terms for identities, you want to take a close look at these for terms that are especially used in the United States. People of color is now the preferred phrase for a person in the United States that is not white. Please don't make the mistake of saying a colored person. That's an old-fashioned term that was gotten rid of because it had turned into a very racist use. If you have to use the terms black and white, always initial cap them. And I'm sure you've seen this, seems like word salad to many people. LGBTQIA+ is one acronym that is used to describe people in terms of gender and sexual orientation. You always want to use the proper terms if you need to talk about this in your writing. What's interesting, and some people wonder why these terms are changing. Sometimes the terms change because a term that someone uses for themselves might be used by people who discriminate against them. And then it becomes, for example, a racist term that we no longer want to use. In some cases, people change terms that they use because they are bringing more people to the table. So rather than it just being a handful of people defining terms, there are more people saying, well, yeah, but that doesn't specifically describe me, and I want to have input into that. And you can see here a link to a website that has a great list of terms for identities and also describes things like unconscious bias. Additional resources that you can use, the Chicago Manual of Style and the APA Manual of Style both have sections specific to terms that you should use. A lot of that has to do with academic writing. Again, for example, in the work that I've done as a technical communicator, I've not had to use the terms for race or gender in my writing, but they are there in those manuals if you follow those and have a reason to use them. The Microsoft Style Guide has a section on bias-free communication. That helps a lot because it's very specific to software and user experience. Also, if you can find this Ashley Rentz on LinkedIn, she recently published a several-page document that has her own list of terms that she had proposed to the company she works for, and they've accepted. So that's a good place to look. The IBM Academy of Technology is working on a project to publish a similar documentation that talks about getting rid of bias in the words that we use in technical communication. That should be coming soon. And I haven't read it, but it's been recommended to me to read Inclusive Design for a Digital World, Designing with Accessibility in Mind. So that again is, again has most specifically to do about accessibility, but that author is also interested in talking about general diversity, equity, and inclusion. I see we have some questions, which I will get to here momentarily. All right, so I promised you I'd talk to you a little bit about the STC Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Advisory Panel. And the panel was started this year at the recommendation of somebody who attended the annual meeting. So that would have been the 2019 annual meeting. In case you didn't know, anybody who attends the meeting who's an STC member can make a proposal for the STC board to consider. And what's really fantastic, we were talking earlier with Christina about how some tragedies can cause some great opportunities, is as of this year, the meeting is now being held virtually. So in the past, you had to attend the business meeting at the STC Summit, which is somewhere in the United States, always held there. Sometimes it's on the West Coast and sometimes it's on the East Coast or right in the middle. And it can be very difficult for most people to get there. But this year, it was held virtually, and hopefully they will continue to give that option so that more people can provide their ideas to the board directly. So the board took up the idea of having a DEIAP. They have a number of panels that you can, and committees that you can see on the website if you're interested. And this particular panel provides advice and insight, recommendations on matters of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this goes to the STC board and the STC staff. We are providing advice on a range of areas and steps that the society can take to be more inclusive to members and potential members. And again, it's based on all of the different ways, national origin, nation of residence, age, sexual orientation, etc. One thing that is really exciting about this is that we plan on doing outreach to all of the chapters around the globe and giving some advice and seeking input from around the world. So here is the current members of the DEIAP. India's Mac Pandit is on our team and is bringing quite a bit of insight from there. We have Tony Mantic, she's in the United States. Liz Fraley, who is from California. Agnes Krenzel is in Texas. Vicky Dill, I can't think of where she's from in the country right now, and Roger Renteria, who is in Arizona. And so we have two main goals for the next few years as the panel. So first, we want to help STC be more diverse, equitable, and inclusive for all STC leaders, members, and guests. And we want to do this through improvements to how we recruit members and leaders, improvements to elections, how we mentor people and who can get into mentoring programs, the language that we use on our website and in our publications and presentations. So you'll be seeing guidance come out from STC on what images to use and what terms to use in presentations that you're giving or webinars you're giving for STC. And then the second goal that we have is to impact DEI in the technical communication profession. So we have been working with that IBM group on terminology, and we will come out with a full terminology recommendation. And we also are talking a lot about usability and wanting to provide input into that. And finally, we want to talk about hiring practices and if we can make recommendations to hiring managers in the technical communications field on how to be more equitable and inclusive in who they hire. So for example, someone might think that if a person has a non-US accent, or that they speak in a way that they don't perceive as professional as what their idea of professional or easy to understand is, that does not necessarily equate into how somebody can do their writing. So we're working on that. And on the DEIAP website, you can see our STC policy statement. STC is committed to supporting the participation of all members, volunteers, and guests across the globe. STC policies and training will ensure we all respect, encourage, and develop our colleagues' perspectives, ideas, and efforts while providing opportunities for growth to all of our members. So that's what STC is committed to in the coming years to make STC a better place to volunteer for and participate in. All right, so that is the end of my formal presentation. So how about I stop sharing my screen and then we can take a look at whatever questions that we have. All right, so I talked about the conscious bias a little bit. So somebody asks, could you please elaborate on the 80-20 rule? How is it justified when an equally important person does not get an equivalent experience? Yeah, so I would agree that, you know, especially in today's day and age, it is not justified. And that's why companies and developers and designers are trying to make a change here. I heard that the 80-20 rule for designing products was actually something developed back in the 1800s by somebody who primarily focused on people in Belgium. and had measured people and determined, based on the folks in Belgium, how people should interact with the world. And as you can imagine, the people in Belgium are not necessarily representative of the bulk of the world. But that's how they started to devise things. It fit 80% of the people, but definitely is not something that I would recommend people do today. So there's a question, how is man or woman more acceptable than male, female? That is a fine question, and I can't say that I can tell you the answer off the top of my head on that one. It is what the recommendation of the APA Manual of Style is, and I'd have to double check their rationale for that. All I did was report it. Is a bias against non-native writers a real bias, or is it acceptable to use? Is a bias against non-native writers? I'm assuming that this is in relation to my comment about hiring practices, and not assuming that, or assuming that someone who has an accent, for example, can't write in the way that one should write for that organization. Yeah, I mean, my gut instinct is to say that it's not acceptable to automatically write somebody off as a candidate for doing writing. Based on that, I would recommend that you get a writing sample, for example, or have a quick writing test would be a way to prove that out. I know people who are from other countries initially and have a better command of the English language, for example, than people who grew up in the United States. So I don't think it's appropriate to automatically write somebody off, even in a technical communication field, if they're not a native speaker, if that's the question.
Wendy, if I may jump in here, but if I were to ask a question like, but these biases do still exist based on, how you speak or what your where you come from. Like, for example, I primarily communicate in English, but many times companies have said that you come from India, English is not your primary language, and these biases do exist. So yes. What's the right way to kind of navigate through a field like that?
As a person who's looking to be a candidate for a job, you mean?
Not just necessarily a job. I mean, job is one aspect, but if you're a freelance writer, or a technical communicator, or you run an agency and you're trying to pitch for business as a client, all of these things, biases play such a big role. For example, there are biases in companies in America who say that, oh, you're in India, your quality of delivery will not be as good as the quality of delivery in America. These are genuine biases. I have come across that. My agency has lost a lot of business based on those biases. So what's the way to kind of, again, it's a minefield out there, and we want to kind of figure out how to navigate that.
Yeah, I haven't given a lot of thought as of this point as to what the freelance writer or the writer can do. And I think that's something that the DEIAP should tackle. And I'm gonna jot that down and bring it to the group, because we were thinking about focusing on helping potential employers look past their bias, but not necessarily how the person who's bringing themselves to the job market or to a freelance could overcome that. But that's a very good question, and I'll look into seeing if I can come up with an answer for you on that. It is really difficult to overcome any bias. I worked for an organization for many years that no matter what was happening, no matter what I did as an employee or otherwise, they were never going to promote me because I was a woman. And I worked there for, I don't want to say how many years because people will go ahead and figure out what company it was. But never in the entire time I worked there had they ever promoted a woman. And eventually in that situation, I just decided to leave the organization because it wasn't going to, I wasn't going to move mountains myself on that one. So, sometimes obviously people can't just choose to not get business from someone in the United States, or they can't just choose to quit their job because there's financial impacts. So let me think a little bit more about that and get back to you.
Since you're already on that path, may I actually ask you to add a little bit more to that? Because by extension of the fact that they're building these biases, it also builds out a sort of disparity or an inequity in how much they would actually pay for a service if they found an equally valid candidate. So for example, in a job, right? I mean, if they were to build these biases, they say, okay, I found an equally talented Indian person versus a talented US person, but I'll pay the Indian person less because guess what, they're Indian. Or if you're coming from India, or if I'm outsourcing to India, I'll pay them 40% less because in India, the cost of living isn't that much. No, the cost of expenses are pretty much at par across the world. I mean, if you look at it, so you can't make that kind of a disparity or an inequity in that assumption as well. So how about that aspect of things as well?
Yeah, I think in that situation, you're right. This doesn't surprise me that people would run into that. And I think you have to, build it into the conversation with the end user or the potential purchaser of your work, is that, this is the rate that we charge. And, I'm wondering, do they get into that level of detail, or are they just saying, well, give me a better price?
Well, see, if it is negotiation, that's absolutely fine. That's par for the course. But I'm saying that they literally lowball you from the word go. So, it's that, again, it comes from a place of bias because they believe that when you come from that space, oh, you're not going to need so much money. I can save a quick buck. I mean, if you look at outsourcing generally, the reason they go to these third world countries is because they could save some money.
Right.
So it comes from a place of a very similar bias. And so therefore I bring these questions.
Yeah. That's okay. This is, again, something I haven't thought too intently on, but I will. I mean, it makes sense that that's why they're, maybe going to India in the first place, right? As you said, and maybe there's a way to demonstrate that it's the same level of quality, and maybe that's also what they're thinking is, oh, it's going to be slightly less quality too because you're not a native English speaker or something like that.
Yeah, but you see, I mean, the bias goes either way. It's like either your delivery is going to be a subpar, or you don't need to pay as much for same quality. I don't know how that thought works, but it's something that I have experienced over the last I don't know, so long now. But anyway, I thank you very much for your insights. I do appreciate this, and I'm going to leave it at this point.
Okay.
We also have Mac here in the audience, so I'm going to upgrade him, and if you'd like to kind of have a conversation.
Yeah, I would like to invite Mac kind of to close the session and formally thank on behalf of STC India for having you here, Wendy.
Great.
This was a very wonderful session, Wendy. Can't be enough grateful. And it is so great to close the conference by initiating a topic that is of such an importance as of now. So thank you so much. Mac, would you like to close the session with your comments?
Well, it's been a pleasure to be a part of the committee along with Wendy and others. And I can tell you that we are really trying to create some ideas, let's say, which will probably develop into more better thoughts, more evolved thoughts and policies, not just for STC worldwide, but also for all the various chapters. So I would thank Wendy for taking the leadership to form the committee, inviting me to be a part of it, and also for coming here today and sharing her thoughts with everybody at the India chapter. Thanks, Rajiv.
Yes, thank you very much for having me. It's been a great conference. And oh, Rajiv, you're muted.
Sorry. Yeah, Wendy, please go ahead.
Yeah, just, yeah, thank you very much for having me. And I hope that the presentation gave some insight into the usability aspect, user assistance aspect, at the same time, helping folks think about this in a larger context.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much, and hope we can have more of you in our later conferences, and we can collaborate in some more ways than this. So hopefully this will be a great start for all of us to get connected to you. And thanks, Mac, for getting us connected to Wendy. So wish you all the best for all your efforts in helping STC move in the right direction with these initiatives under your guidance. Thanks, everyone. And with this note, we are privileged to announce the closing of the conference, a very, very successful conference to say. We had a great 1.5 days of lineup of sessions, great speakers, and to top it all, a great audience. So thank you so much, everyone. I hope to see you soon. Mugdha, would you like to close on behalf of STC India?
Thank you, Rajiv.
A few words.
Yeah, thanks, Wendy, for an extremely interesting session. I think this is the first time we've had a session in STC India on this topic. And Mac, we are very excited to see you team up with Wendy, and I'm sure you'll get in your own perspective to the initiative. Overall, I think this conference has been an astounding success. You know, today on a Saturday evening at 9:45, if I'm still having 110 speakers, 110 participants with me, I think it's a great achievement and something that we had not actually thought of, right? We had our own share of doubts when we decided to go ahead, and there's a lot of brainstorming as to whether we should have sessions on a Saturday with a Thanksgiving, you know, which is falling in line with the Thanksgiving holiday. But I guess our risk has paid off, and this has been an absolute great conference. Not to mention that along with the sessions and along with it being a virtual conference, we've also created history in terms of having consistent participants with us for consecutive 2 days and very engaging sessions and extremely engaged audience. If you take a look at the chat window and the Q&As, you will understand that for every session, we've had outpour of questions which we were not able to address in the interest of time. So all in all, a great effort. Thank you, Rajiv, for coordinating all this, and thank you to all the volunteers and all the speakers and all the participants who made this a great success. Thank you so much, everybody.